in the workflow, we will be starting with the scratch. Some of the things might be, quite easy for you to understand at the beginning because I'll be starting from very basics and very scratch things. So let's understand first of all what is workflow. In terms of the words, we will first understand what is workflow. As you can see, workflow is made up of two words. First is work plus flow. It's nothing but flow of a work. So whenever we consider an ERP system, which is called Enterprise Resource Planning, we will be having different departments in an ERP system connected together. For an example, you have an HR department, financials department, purchasing department, sales department, service department. So all these departments will be connected through an ERP software. The ERP software, it tries to integrate all the different departments together by means of some hardware and software combination. So that's what an ERP is. Now, when it comes to multiple departments, there will be multiple people working in the multiple departments. Every department will have a head of department. Then below that, you will have subheads, managers, directors, vice presidents, senior vice presidents. Then you may be having employees. Then you may be having team secretaries. So there are different levels of people who will be working within a department. Based on the different roles, these people will have different authorizations. For an example, if I want to approve leave of an employee, I cannot do if I am just an employee. I can only do that when I am tagged as a manager. So when company gives me a manager role, at that point of time, I will get an authorization to approve leaves of employee. At the same time, if I am a store manager, then only I can allow a radioactive material to be stored as part of my plant or as part of my inventory. So there are multiple approvals needed in different business processes in order to complete the business transactions. And there are a lot of combinations also involved. A lot of different types of checks are also involved whenever it comes to a business process. So all that can becomes a very difficult task when it is done manually. Imagine if you have to apply for a leave. So what you do is you write an email to your manager. Your manager has to check the email. He or she will check the feasibility, whether other resources are available at this time or not. Then he or she has to get back to you whether your leave is approved or not. In case if the manager is on leave, then the request is gone. You are again waiting. You may not be knowing what's happening to your request. Similarly, there are many combinations like this, wherein a business process has to be completed with the involvement of different people in the organization. So, to automate these processes, we have a standard way in SAP to design and execute them is called workflow. So workflow is nothing but a flow of work which consists of different steps. Each step involves a particular people or a particular role in the organization. That's what a workflow is. Since the process of applying leave is same for all the employees, we can use a workflow for all the employees. So whether your colleague is raising a leave request or you are raising the leave request, everybody is using the same way of doing it. So you can standardize it. That is one thing. Second thing, all the defined checks can be done automatically. The mails can be triggered automatically. Sometimes you might have seen that if you want to purchase something in your organization, let's say you order for a new laptop, at that time an automatic email gets generated which says your SRM request has been created for laptop and it is waiting for your manager's approval. Once your manager approves it, it automatically again sends an email to you that your manager has approved the SRM request. Now the request is with the admin department. Once it reaches to admin department, they will request a purchase order. So that way you can easily track the process, as well as the process can be standardized for all the employees, and there will not be any chances of mistakes. The request will land up to the correct person automatically. So there are many combinations like this which we can achieve using workflow. Any questions here before we start and getting into the SAP workflow? Okay. So let's start with the basics of SAP workflow. So as I mentioned, workflow is nothing but it's a set of different tasks, different activities involves different tools, or I would say roles, in order to automate business process. That's what a workflow is. Now, I will take an example here of same thing, what I've just discussed, leave approval process. That's the simplest example. If a person wants to understand the basics of workflow, the basic terminologies behind the workflow, that is the simplest example. We will be looking more complex examples, but right now I just want to make you understand with the terminologies. So I'm taking a small example. So let's say your manager comes to you and they say you need to develop a workflow which automates the leave approval process of employees. So let's say leave approval process. So in this there are different steps. So let me write the steps first of all. So an employee will trigger a leave request. The request will automatically go to the inbox of manager. So when a request is created, it will land to the inbox concerned manager. Okay, the manager takes an action to either approve or reject. Based on the action taken by manager, mail will be sent employee informing about the status, whether leave is approved or rejected. So this is a very small business process which we will now develop using SAP workflow. So in terms of a flow chart, if you guys are comfortable with software engineering, when we used to study in engineering colleges, we used to design a flow chart exactly in the same graphical way we design SAP workflow. So when it comes to the steps, you will have something called a start step, from where you will be starting, and then you will be having an end step of workflow, starting of workflow, ending of workflow. These are two steps which are by default present in every workflow. Then after the start, first step is going to be request for a leave. So request for leave, wherein only two possible options are present. One is approve, second is reject. These two options will be available when you are raising a request. Now this request will automatically reaches to manager's inbox. Then manager has to take an action on this request. And finally, once the manager takes an action, we will be having two possible outcomes of it. One outcome is accept, and one outcome is result. Reject. This is the first outcome, which is, let's say he has approved the leave, and second outcome, he has rejected the leave. And finally, it will end the workflow. It's like this. So on approval, you will send an email for approve, and then on reject, you will send an email for reject. So this branch is going for approval, and this branch is going for rejection. And finally, the workflow gets ended. So now here, this is how we will design our workflow. So let me make you understand with the terminologies here. The first term is activity. What is an activity? So here, if you see this particular step or this particular step is known as an activity. An activity is nothing but it's a step of a workflow wherein a person will be involved. In this, when a request will go, your manager is involved. In this, when a mail will come, you are yourself involved. That's called activity. So in terms of a workflow, activity is one of the block of a workflow or one of the step of workflow which involves a person. Now, the person who is involved in the activity is known as agent. Remember these terms. We will be having different chapters later on specifically about agent and activities. Okay, what is an agent? The person involved in the activity is known as agent. There are different types of agents, possible agents, excluding agents, then you have assigning agents. There are different types of agents. We will be discussing all the types of agents as well going through the classes. We will see the impact of agents on the different activities. All of that we will be seeing once we'll go with the further sessions. There are different types of activities we will also be looking at through one by one when we will go through sessions. So there will be 3-4 sessions on activity and 3-4 sessions on agent itself in order to understand the depth knowledge of each. Then when you execute a workflow, now understand this is like a class. This whole piece, whole chunk is like a class. So whenever you want to create or whenever you want to use a class, what we usually do, we create object of the class. Similarly, in the background, an object of each activity will be created automatically by SAP system. So when we execute a workflow, an object will be created of each activity. For each activity. This is known as task. Very important topic. Task. What is task? A task is nothing but it's a runtime instance of an activity. A task will be created. Sorry, I'm so sorry. Task is not runtime object. It's basically the runtime object is known as work item. So work item is nothing but it's an object created at runtime. When you execute the workflow for an activity, you will have an object created. So that is called work item. Now what is task? Inside the activity, you will have the task. So when you put an activity, inside that activity, you will have a task. Okay, and this particular task will be assigned to an agent. So inside this task, you will have a unique ID of this particular task, so that during the workflow system you can find. Yes, Prashna, you have a question.
Hey Anubhav, so you told that when we execute a workflow on each object will be created for each activity, right?
Yes, an instance of that particular task will be created. That's what I'm saying. Instance,
Okay, so
not object in terms of class. I just take an example of normal classes, but here I'm just saying an instance of task will be created. I will show you that in the system shortly. How it
no,
will.
because of because what I was trying understanding is because, for example, a work item for each particular workflow will be having each work item, right? So we'll be having only one work item for one
No,
workflow, right?
for within a workflow, you can have many work items.
Oh, okay.
Many work items. I will show you that in the system, how the work item looks like. But for the workflow itself, you will also have a work item created. That is called parent work item. So there can be many work items for the workflow. Also, a work item will be created. We will see this when we will analyze the workflow logs. I will show you what is workflow log. So when we analyze the workflow log, you will get to know what is work item. But right now understand these terminologies. What is an activity? Activity is nothing but when we want to create a step in the workflow, that is called an activity. Now each activity consists of a task which uniquely identifies that activity. These tasks can be of two types, standard task or custom task. And we have an agent involving into that activity. When you run the workflow for each task, and work item will be created.
One
Yeah.
last question is one workflow can have any number of activities, right?
Yes, exactly. You can see here in this workflow itself, we have two activities. One activity is user decision activity, and another activity is we have a mail activity, right? Okay,
Yes.
so let's get started with with the system. Now in the system, I will show you. We will also make a note of all the transaction codes which we will be using, because when you guys are working with workflow, it's very important to remember all the T codes. So I will be making one slide which will only contain all the T codes which we will go through during our classes.
Anubhav, I have a question. Can you go to the previous slide once?
Yes.
So here you are saying activity means whenever an agent involves in and to make a task, then it will be called as activity. So can we call a system as an agent sometimes?
System as an agent. No. An agent is nothing but it's an SAP user.
Mm-hmm.
You
But
cannot
some tasks, when you say activity, some tasks will be performed by the system itself, right?
exactly.
Some third-party tools, something. Yeah.
Exactly, you are absolutely correct. But if you really observe in between, inside the workflow, what happens is we will have a standard user in SAP system called WF-batch. This is a standard user which exists in all SAP systems. This is dedicatedly, it's not a dialog user. You cannot use this user for your transaction purpose like VA01, MM01. It's purely a background user which is used to perform the internal tasks which are done by system itself. For an example, if you want to, do some kind of background checks, you want to execute a BAPI inside the background. So there is no person involved. You just checking, calling a BAPI to check whether material is belonging to, let's say, this plant or not. So all these checks will be done by BAPI. So when you want to call a BAPI, there must be a user who is calling the BAPI. So workflow uses a WF batch user internally to execute this BAPI. So agent is a person who is actually receiving the work item. In right terms, if you say a person is an agent when who receives these work items. This work item will be received by agent. Sometimes we will be creating some tasks which are not sending any work item. which are just doing some checks like I mentioned, BAPI call, something like this. That is called that there no agent is involved. Does that answer your question, Rajesh?
Yes.
Okay. So we will see the system. It will be more clear to you guys once we will see all these things in our SAP system shortly. So what I will be doing is I will be making a note of all the T codes which we will be using during our transaction. Okay? So that all we will make a note of it, so that we will, whenever we need the T code information, it will be handy to us. Okay. So let me start with the SAP system. So the first very important T code which we will be using is T code for workflow builder. What is workflow builder? Whenever we want to create a new workflow or we want to change a SAP workflow, we need to use workflow builder. It's a repository of all the workflows where we can change, or I would say maintain the workflows, create or maintain the workflow. So first T code is SWDD, workflow builder. That is first transaction. Second transaction which I will be using is SO10. This is called workplace, users workplace, where you will receive all the work items. This is the place where manager will get to know that blah blah employee has requested for a leave. This is called SAP user workplace, or we also know it as business workplace. There is one more T code which is specific to this SAP business workplace. You can see you can directly go to SAP business workplace by Control F12 on the main menu of SAP. SAP business workplace. It's available on the main menu of SAP. I can directly click on it or press Control F12 on my first screen and it takes me to the business workplace. So one more transaction is SDWP. These two transactions are almost same. Now coming to the next one is SE24, which is for class builder. We will be also developing a couple of classes because there are a lot of object orientation involved with workflow. Then one more is SWIA, which is called workflow logs. So these transactions I will be making a note in the last slide. I will be sharing this slide with you. So you can, keep it very handy for you in case of future use. We will be adding more and more transactions to it. There are more than 50 transactions which we will go through throughout our classes. So you will be, keep it remember when they are placed at a single slide. Now let's go to the workflow builder to design the workflow, whatever requirement we have been given just now. So I go to /n, go to SWDD transaction to design a new workflow. You can see it has started the SWDD transaction. Let me introduce you with the different areas of SWDD. The first area what we see on the top is the title bar. This is the title bar of your workflow, which informs you about the title of the workflow you designed. Then you have the application toolbar, which provides you different functions to create or maintain a workflow, activate a workflow. Then you have the next area which informs you about the version of the workflow as well as the number of the workflow. It's a unique number by which a workflow is designed or recognized. Okay. Then we have the steps. As I mentioned, each workflow is consist of many steps. Inside each step, you can have different tasks. These are different tasks. You can see in this workflow, I have 3 tasks or 3 steps, I would say. Each task inside, if I go, you will see a task in each step. Then you can see different types of step types. Basically, you can create different step types like activity, web activity, send an email, form, user decision. I will explain you all these activity types. What is the meaning of each, when we use what. Then this is the main graphical model area where the workflow is kept on design. So we designed the workflow in this particular area. You can see there are 2 steps default, workflow started and workflow ended. In between this area, we will be putting our steps, whatever we want. Sometimes the workflow becomes very lengthy. I mean, it involves more than 100, 200 steps, so it becomes very large. So we will not be able to see everything on this particular area. In that case, we can use this side area to zoom in the particular part of the workflow. So these are all the different sections of the workflow. We will be discussing all about around this particular workbench, everything. So this is the central workbench from where everything starts and everything ends. So this from here, most of the time we will be working throughout our sessions through this workbench, SWDD transaction. Okay, so let's start with designing a new workflow. I'll just go for a create button. So click on create. So you can see a new workflow got added, wherein workflow started and workflow ended is there. In between there is no step created so far. Now I just right now do a blind save just to save my workflow, whatever I'm starting with. Every workflow have a unique workflow number, which I just showed you shortly before. In that number will be given by SAP automatically. I will tell you how that number will be decided by SAP later point of time, but you can give an abbreviation to the workflow. So all the workflows which we will be creating, we will start with ZWF underscore some name we will be giving. So let's say that's our first workflow. In case if you want this particular ID system access, you can opt for it, and then later point of time you can practice in this system, as well as you can look into the examples which we have developed during our classes. So it is on optional basis. Now this is my first workflow which I am creating. Click on OK. I will see some number generated here for the workflow. I am saving it as a local object. The current user which I am using is Manish user in this system. The user name is Pradeep, but user ID is Manish. So I save it as a local object. You can see it is saved, and a number is generated uniquely for my workflow. Let me copy this and put it in the slide so that even in future reference we can refer to this particular workflow. This is the workflow for leave approval. Perfect. Now next, let's create our first step. So first step is a user can request for a leave. So I double click here. It will show me different step types. You can see there are different step types. So I want a user decision step type basically to ask another user whether is this possible or not, or can you please approve this particular thing or not. Whenever you have a user actions to be taken, we will go with the user decision option. So I select user decision, click on OK. Now I will enter the title here, title of user decision. So I'm keeping the title as please approve my leave. Okay, so that is my first title of my user decision. Now coming to the expression. Here we will be selecting the workflow initiator. So as I mentioned earlier, every workflow step has to assign an agent whenever it comes to something called an activity. Whenever user has to take an action, in that case it should involve a user. So here the request should land into the manager's inbox. So we need to tell the manager ID here. But what happens if your manager changes? It will still go to the old manager's inbox, which will become a problem. So sometimes we, do very judicious programming here. We will assign different agents based on different criteria like role based. So whenever it comes to role, I will just assign it to with a role in HR system. Then whatever is your current manager, automatically your leave request will go to the current manager's inbox. So all these I will be teaching you throughout our classes about all these in the agents chapter. But right now just understand I am putting workflow initiator. So whoever is started this workflow, this particular user decision will land into that particular user's inbox only. So that's called workflow initiator. Whoever is starting this workflow, in this case I will start, so the request will come into my inbox only. This is called workflow initiator. Now I will be adding the decision text. One is called approve, it's called reject. Click on OK. One more thing about the task, as I mentioned, every activity or step will have a task. You can see the task number here for this particular step. Now this is a standard task which is created by SAP. We will be discussing more in detail about tasks. So this is a standard task which is created by SAP. You can see the task here in the control tab also. This is a standard task. You cannot change this task at all. But you can create your custom tasks by copying these standard tasks. We will discuss about this also in detail in further classes. So this task is associated to this particular user decision step. Now I say OK. You can see one particular user decision step is created. Now we have two options right down there. One is accept and one is reject. You can see automatically based on the options I've given, the branches are created. Approve branch and reject branch. So whenever it got approved, I will send an email to the employee saying that your leave request has been approved. So I come to the approved branch, double click here. Sorry, I'll just go back, right click here and say create. So I will be adding a new step inside this particular branch. I say create and choose option send an email. This is again one more step type. In this particular case, I will be sending the email to the workflow initiator. As you can see, who will receive this email? That is the agent again. What is the title of the email? Leave request approved. I'll just say hard leave or leave. Perfect. That's my email text. That's the body of the email and that's the title of the email. Say okay. Give it to the local object. You can see one email step is created in the approved branch. Similarly, I will add an email step in the rejected branch. So I go right click and say send an email. I say leave request rejected. Put the body. Click on OK. So here what's happening is I am the workflow initiator. I mean basically when I will execute, I am the initiator. So I will only receive this work item saying that please approve the leave, and I myself is going to receive the email also. So here there is no manager-employee relationship. Everything I am only doing just for the sake of understanding. I am keeping it. Later on we will see some scenarios where we will involve multiple users. So one user is executing it, initiating the workflow. It's the work item is being sent to the another user, and one other user takes an action. It comes back to the first user's inbox saying that this is what is happened. So right now, just understand we have only one user at this point, so I'm adding it for one user. Click on save. This workflow is saved. We can do a syntax. We can do a check here for the workflow. It will just evaluate whether everything is okay. You can see everything is okay without any warnings or errors. And I will now activate the workflow. So when I activate the workflow, you will be able to see the status of the workflow. You can see the workflow status says it's active. When the workflow status is not active, whatever changes you have done will not reflect, will not be visible to the other users. So even though you made the changes, made everything correct, if the user is still executing the workflow, they will not be able to avail the advantage of your changes until or unless you activate it, just like your ABAP programs. Any questions, guys, till here before we go with the execution of this workflow?
One thing, is this client dependent or client independent?
This is client dependent. Whenever a workflow is created, you can also send this particular, sorry, this is client independent, but we can have client dependent workflows also, which are specific to a client. Okay. You can see right now I'm using client 800, so this is the prefix which is added to 800. But we can actually send this workflow to another client also. I will be taking some scenarios as well to cover this. How to migrate a workflow from one system to another system and one client.
One more thing, yeah, and the Tico you told, right, SO10, that's for standard text, right, Argo? That's not for SAP business.
Okay, I think
Progress.
it's SO01. I'm so sorry.
Yeah.
We will see that next. So then yes, it's for standard text, creating the text which can be later on used in ABAP programs as well as in WebIntro. Okay, so now let's get started with the execution of this workflow. I will click on execute right from here. So this screen I will be explaining when we will go with the different types of agent assignment and deadline monitoring as well as containers. When we will go through that point of time, we will be talking about this screen. Now I just say execute. Immediately I say execute, I will receive this work item. But I don't want to, open this work item here. I will go to my business workplace. So when you come back, you will see from here only you can go to workflow log as well, and from business workplace. Both you can go. But I don't want to go from here. Maybe I'll go with SO01. So I will open another session with SO01. You can see in my inbox, in the workflow section, I have got a work item. It says, please approve my leave request to. That's a work item which is created just now on 19/12/2014. The status of this is in process because somehow when I received it, it automatically got opened. When it wouldn't have got opened, this would have been, in the unprocessed state. It would have come as a very white color icon, which means it's active but not in process. Since I've opened it, it is now in process state. Okay, all the details like timestamp, priority will come over here. Now this is my work item. This is what I was talking about. Work item is nothing but it's item which is received by the agent when a task gets executed. So you have a user decision task which got executed, a work item is received. If I again execute the same workflow, what will happen? One more work item will be created. So now one more work item is created for the same task. So task is one, but different instances of that task is being created here. Because of that, you are receiving work items. You can see now two work items are there in your inbox. The same workflow, same task, but two work items. That is the reason, why we do work item, because same task can be executed by multiple user or same user multiple times. So you have a concept of work items. In same task, multiple work items are created. So it's not like they both are dependent on each other, they both are independent. This leave request is different, this leave request is different. That's why we have concept of work items. Now probably I'll just go to the first one, double click on this, it will open the work item, the user decision work item. You can see please approve my leave request dude, that's the text, and you have options approve, reject and cancel and keep work item in inbox. I will go with approve. I click on approve button. This completes my work item and I will be taken back to the inbox automatically. So first work item is over. Let me click on documents. You can see I have got an email automatically because I was the person as an agent myself for the email step also. Workflow initiator was there in the email step. So I've got this. You can see it's unread message. Right now I'm not open this, so it's an unread message. I double click on this. You can see, hi colleague, your leave request has been approved by manager. Thanks and regards, workflow team. I go back. Now I will probably take an action on the second workflow also. I'll go to the second work item. This is a different leave request. I will reject it. So you can see it is gone out because I've taken an action on it. Automatically it got deleted. And I will receive an email saying that the leave request rejected. So that's how the workflow is working. So now you have standardized this process in a SAP system. So nobody need to, keep sending mails between one manager to another manager and all that. That is not at all required. Sometimes, in companies, you have complex scenarios where a leave request has to go with the 2-level approvals or 3-level approvals. So all these can be processed or can be designed using workflow, which is quite difficult when you use normal emails to, do all this. That's why workflow is highly used. This is just a very small example. There can be many examples. Whenever a purchase order is created, automatically a purchase requisition should also be created in your company for the same purchase order. How will you automate that process? And that has to go with an approval of a manager. Whenever you ask for raise a purchase order or whenever you raise for a sales order, you automatically have to have validation of an item to be done. And if the item is not present, it should automatically request a PO for this raw material. All these complex business processes can be designed using workflow and they can be triggered from standard SAP transactions. I will show you how a workflow can be triggered from T codes, how it can be triggered from ABAP program, how it can be triggered from an event, how it can be triggered from an oops event, how it can be triggered from a change document. There are different ways of triggering a workflow when you design. This all we will be seeing in our next set of classes. So that is about my business repository, where I can see the work items are now coming as and when the tasks are executed in if I am the responsible agent for those tasks. Okay. Now I will show you the workflow log. Let's go back to the workflow, and here directly we can go to workflow log. I click on this. So workflow log gives you a complete information about what got executed, when got executed, who was the agent involved. This is very, very important when it comes to debugging of a workflow. In your company, you will be having already the workflows designed. They will be using these workflows. You will be getting problems. They will be raising the tickets for you that, hey, I am getting this problem in this workflow, or this workflow is not working fine. Can you please look into it? In that case, you will be debugging the workflow. You will come to the workflow log and you will get to know which step is failed. So here it will clearly tell you which step failed, which step passed, what has happened, who was the agent in which step. Like in this leave request step, I want to see who was the agent. So all that can be checked using this workflow log. You can click on this agents button. It will tell you who was the agent. So I would say possible agent. Sorry, not here. You can click on this button, list with the technical details. And I just say Control P. You have to press Control P here. And now you can see here, this is called technical log of book. If you click here and show agents, I think you can right away see here when you expand this, Pradeep. Pradeep was the agent. This is the user who has got this. As I mentioned, the user ID is Manish, but the name of the user is Pradeep. So Pradeep has got this work item. All this log can be very, very helpful for you to actually analyze this step. And if a step is taking too much of time, let's say workflow is very slow, all the time can also be checked here. When it started, when it ended, how much time this particular step has taken. Sometimes it will be a performance problem in workflow. So you need to see which step is taking more time. Maybe there is a BAPI call, and if you need to do some performance improvement in that BAPI, then you can easily find out which step is the culprit. We will be analyzing all the logs of workflow during our classes, whatever workflows we will create. One more important thing, as I mentioned, whenever there is a background task or some tasks which are related to self-system, like it was asked earlier, there is something called a standard user called WF-batch, which executes this task. So mail was something which there was no activity involved by user in the mail. Mail is something which system has to send to your inbox automatically. So you can see this activity was done by WF-batch user. Automatically WF-batch user does this activity for you. It triggers internally a BAPI which sends an email with this particular user, WF-batch. So likewise, there are many things here to understand. We will be looking all these things step by step as and when we will proceed with our consecutive sessions. It is impossible to cover all the things in one session. You will be getting even doubts as well, and I will be covering a lot of things throughout the sessions of workflow. Any questions here till now? Understanding the basic terminologies of workflow.
No.
This is pretty simple. You guys can design it. Yeah.
So, Anubhav, I have a question.
Yeah, sure.
So when you say this workflow, will it be a part of a business object, or it will be a separate object
It is a
when you
separate
say.
object. Business object is created using business object repository. There is a separate transaction for that. And actually, when you execute an activity type of step, you can trigger a method of a business object. So business object is nothing but it's an entity in SAP which represents an SAP object. For an example, purchase order is a business object, sales order is a business object. Now, related to that business object, you have different things, attributes as well as methods. Attributes like sales order number, plant, sales organization, then you have order type. These are all the attributes of sales order business object. Methods like create sales order, delete sales order, edit sales order, add an item, remove an item. All these are the methods or behaviors of that business object. We can associate a business object along with a workflow to execute or perform different tasks. So just some time back, I've taken an example. Whenever a purchase order is created, we need to create a purchase requisition. So how will that be possible? You have a business object called purchase order. So whenever purchase order gets created, it triggers an event. That event says, I am created. We will subscribe our workflow to that event. So whenever the okay, I think there was a connection loss. I'm so sorry. So I was talking about business objects. So just take an example wherein whenever a purchase order is created, I want to create a purchase requisition. So what happens is you have a purchase order as a business object. This purchase order business object will have an event called created. So whenever a purchase order is created, system fires this event and we will subscribe our workflow to that event. And in that workflow, we will create the purchase requisition automatically for the purchase order. So that is how we will use the business objects. So there are standard business objects by SAP and there are custom business objects which we can also create. So I will be talking about business object repository and business objects as well in session number 8.
Oh, is it using the transaction SW01?
Yes, SWO1 is the transaction to create it and maintain a
Okay,
business
okay.
object. Very good. So let me maintain this transaction also. Yes. Any further questions, guys?
I think I'm good.
So that's the end of session 1.